Welcome to the stream. Hope everybody is having a good night. I apologize for the small wait there and for the silence of the stream. As some of you may know if you follow my Twitter, the last stream, which I was really looking forward to uploading to YouTube because I thought it went pretty well, actually can't go on because it, welcome, Tad. Yes, 69, nice. That's funny. Let me put my text down. I can't upload it because I have Chopin in the background, and I guess Chopin, a musician who died in, let me see, Chopin, a musician who died in 1849, has his music still content trolled. It's not technically copywritten, but the music companies know that they can get away with scanning and claiming that any recording of a Chopin is their person, their musician's version of it, and claim the video. And so Twitch muted it before I could even upload it to YouTube. And so there is no last stream. And this stream, and probably a few streams until I figure out a good way to do it without getting copyright strikes, will be more or less silent. Hey, one last stream isn't the end of the world, though I know, Tadpole, and you were really looking forward to listening to it, the good comrade that you are. Yeah, if you could find a good playlist of non-copyrighted music, that would be great. I really enjoy this playlist that we posted in chat. That's what we were just listening to as the stream started, and I wasn't talking, so if it mutes that part, it's not really a risk. It's called Soviet WAV, and there's a playlist of it called Our Dream, and it's my favorite stream background music, but I'm pretty sure it's copywritten. So let me post it in the stream, and if you find anything like it, it would make my day. Tad is wonderful. Everybody say thank you to Tad in the chat if you are available to chat. Also, I changed the notification for my Maddie B-Rad is live. I don't know if it shows up anywhere, but it's supposed to say Maddie B-Rad is live, come chat. So maybe more people will come chat. Yeah, I'm glad that you saw it. And I remembered to update this stream title this time, which is good. How's everybody doing? How's your day been? How's your week been? How was your new year? It's 2020, first stream of 2020. I'm curious to hear about my wonderful community. I had a slow day. It's my last day before I go to work on my new job, which should be exciting. I made myself, if Cam were here, she'd guess that I made broccoli and chicken for dinner, as I seem to do every time, but actually, in a complete change of pace, today I made myself potatoes and salmon instead of chicken and broccoli. seasoned with roughly the same stuff. But hey, mucking about with mods for XCOM 2. Yeah, XCOM is fun. Yeah, it's a weird combination. Potatoes and salmon, I accept that. But I had potatoes and I had salmon, and they're not really, it's not the most satisfying meal I've ever eaten, but it's on the order of unsatisfying meals. It's pretty up there, you know? That's good. You gotta keep fighting, Bread Warrior 42. Socialism will not come about overnight. It's a long fight, it's a hard fight, and it's an exhausting fight. One of the hard things about the kind of activism that we do, that we have to do in the system that we have, is that you don't really see the results. You don't see the victories, because all we are doing right now is building up just a little bit at a time, so that at some point the pressure behind the dam, the metaphorical dam, that I guess I'm using a dam metaphor for some reason, builds so much that it all breaks at once. And it's basically impossible for any of us to tell when that breakage is going to happen. All we can do is organize and prepare for it. And so it can be exhausting work and unsatisfying work, but it is also absolutely necessary work. Let me get my Minecraft up and ready so I can do some busy work while I chat with you about today's tentative stream topic, which, I'll be honest, has a lot to do with the fact that my last video was copywritten. Faz had a wonderful suggestion in the Discord. I don't know if she's listening, but Faz suggested that I talk about how the media is owned by capitalists, by rich people. And that's a good topic, but I think a more general one, and one that can be talked about in a casual stream. I didn't post this on the Reddits or very far, so I don't know how many people are going to come view this one, but that's fine by me. A topic we can discuss in a more casual stream more easily is how the status quo reinforces itself, and the ownership of the media is a big part of that. So that's what I'm hoping to talk about today. I am in a little bit of a nasally mood, nasally sickness, I guess. So my voice might come in and out. You'll just have to forgive that. Or I guess you can not watch the stream, but come on, it's my stream. Who doesn't want to watch it? Let me pop on the Minecraft version. And game capture is up. We'll hop in the server and we'll start talking. So I was thinking about this music being copywritten, stream being muted, can't upload to YouTube thing. What is the stream title right now? It should be why the status quo is so stubborn and how leftists can beat it. Is it not? Weird. I changed it before I started the stream, and I updated it a second ago. I don't know why that's happening. I need to figure it out. Okay, good, Bread Warrior. Something that bothered me about that, about my stream being taken, has nothing to do with my stream being taken or muted or whatever, so I couldn't post it where I wanted to post it, is that, like, I don't know what the solution is, really, because while it's really frustrating for me, in the system as it currently exists, you can see that if I were to get what I want in this situation and be able to post, get more jack-o'-lanterns, and be able to post my stream with the music in it without any problems, what that means really is that the musician who did record Chopin on the piano and took time to do that and created something with their labor that I was then listening to and using for my stream, indeed, wouldn't get paid. And it could be the case that that person's not getting paid anyway, because I don't know who ID'd it and would have stolen the revenue from Twitch. It might not even have been the musician. But let's say it was the musician, like ideal circumstance. They do deserve to get paid for that, and ideally they would get a percentage of whatever ad revenue I'm making on Twitch, which is very little because I encourage people to put on ad blocker, but sure, they'd get some percentage of that. And they would be compensated for their labor, I would be able to use the item, and everything would be good. I guess we don't have a place for this. the trouble is that even in that circumstance, um, what that's doing is it's preventing people. I mean, as it is now, I guess in that circumstance it would be better, but as it is now, it's preventing people entirely from accessing and enjoying this media without paying some broker, in this case, whoever owns the rights to that song, which may not be the musician. In an ideal world, I would want anyone to be able to use whatever music posted on whatever streams they want, and use it basically whatever circumstance they want. Play it loud on the street, hand it out to other people by a disc, pirate it, whatever. I guess it wouldn't be pirating anymore at that point, but you get the idea. Like music, intellectual property, these things should be free. But saying that, and I'm in a situation, I work on software that has been protected. Saying that basically means in the current system, under capitalism as it exists, that the people who work on these things would not get paid for them. And so this is a case where you need some kind of big structural change before you can have the system you want to have, where anyone can use intellectual property, can use copywritten stuff without fear, which is ideally how it should be. I don't know if any of you have read the Watchmen book, or watched the Watchmen movie, or are watching the new Watchmen series. But the guy who made it, Alan Moore, initially wanted to use DC comic characters for all of the characters in Watchmen, but was unable to do so because characters that he had worked on in the past were copywritten and protected, and DC would not release the rights. And so he was really upset about this, and one of the ongoing critiques he makes in the media he produces to this day is of intellectual property as a concept. And this is part one, I guess, one facet of why the status quo is so stubborn. Because when people see something that they desire to be different, like the destruction of intellectual property, that often comes at the cost of somebody else's livelihood, because there are people who rely on the system as it exists and the injustices it has in order to live their lives. And so you're automatically you're dividing the working class, and you're creating different constituencies that benefit from the status quo in certain ways. And of course, the artists don't benefit from the status quo writ large, because the ownership of their intellectual property by corporations often means they're exploited and they have to rely on go-betweens in order to make money for their talents, the work that they're producing. They're not getting the full value of their labor in most cases. And that's when they can even get discovered and make money with their art. A lot of the times artists starve, and that's just how it is. On the other end of it, the people like myself who want to use this music, want to play it for themselves or for others who want to share it around, aren't benefiting from the status quo either. And so it is in the mutual interest of both groups on a large scale to abolish that status quo and create new rules that are mutually beneficial. But that's not what happens, because the system as it exists has people the artists are afraid that if they destroy the system of copyright as it exists right now, they won't get anything, and that's an unfounded fear that could happen. And then on the other hand, let me get some shovels so I can dig out some more dirt. On the other hand, the people who want to listen to music are afraid that if they strengthen those copyright claims and better protect artists, they will have to pay more for art in the future. And so the status quo in this case is really stubborn, because even though neither side likes it as a large system, it has facets that are beneficial to each, and which make the other side afraid that if they lose in a hypothetical conflict, the status quo might be non-beneficial to them. And this has historically been a big problem of working class movements, of any movement for change, reform, revolution, what have you. The ruling classes, the people who are already in charge, have created a system that works well enough for everybody that there has not been a revolution so far. It doesn't mean it's a good system, but it means that it's not bad enough that any one party feels like completely leaving the system behind. And until we convince people to leave the system behind completely, what you're left with is a system where some people are benefited and other people are harmed but are too afraid to try to change things. And the aggregate results, as I've said probably like 6 times in this little speech, this pontification, is that the people who have similar interests in the long run have differing interests in the short term, and so they don't work together towards their long-term interests, long-term goals. And there's a lot to go through with like historical examples of that. There's 1,000,002 of them. The great example is in the bourgeois revolutions, and to an extent in the Russian Revolution, revolutions away from a feudal order. There has to be an alliance between the cities and the farmland, cities and rural communities, in order for a revolution to succeed. And similarly, there has to be an alliance between the people oppressing those communities for the existing regime to succeed. In World War One, the Germans called this the Alliance of Iron and Rye, and they meant like the aristocratic former lords of feudal empires allying with the new bourgeoisie, the iron and the rye. But in the French Revolution, the same thing, only on the opposite side, the alliance of two disparate groups, the farmland and the cities, Paris and the rural farming communities, is what finally toppled the Ancien regime. The royals could have fled to the farmland so long as the cities were in rebellion, as we saw with Versailles. That was basically a permanent attempt to flee the rebellious cities. And on the other hand, the royals could use the manpower of the cities to suppress rural rebellions, so long as the cities remained loyal. It was only once both sides were able to revolt at once and put aside their differences with each other that they were able to bring the Ancien regime to its knees. And this is the case with capitalism too. It's kind of silly to talk about in terms of copyrights, just because that's what's on my mind. But so long as we allow our competing interests to prevent us from developing solidarity, there is no way to take down our Ancien regime. Instead, we'll just continuously fight each other. And that's one of the big reasons why the status quo is so stubborn, why people who should, in every material analysis and measure of what their life would be like outside of the current system, support radical changes. But they do not, because supporting radical changes means risking losing what they have now. Frantz Fanon talks about that bit in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, in the context of colonization and race, and it's a dope read. I think I read that. I apologize if I mispronounced the name. I have... I studied post-colonial history a bit as a part of a few political science courses, and I think one English course that I took. I think I've read passages from The Wretched of the Earth. It is a dope read. I should read it again or in full if I haven't read it already. Because it's good. Anti-colonialism is interesting for the same reason. When you have a imperial core and colonized powers, the proletarians of the imperial core have it in their material interest to join with the proletarians of the exploited third world and leverage their power together to destroy the forces that are exploiting them. But oftentimes that doesn't happen because the people in the imperial core are more afraid of losing what they have as a part of the imperial core than they are excited about gaining a victory. Okay, part one of the stubbornness of the status quo down. It's not an in-depth discussion, I accept that, but I think it was worth talking about and gives us a good lead-in to some other ideas. Any questions so far? Comments, discussion points, things that can allow me to drink some water and save my voice a little bit? The absence of the music really makes me self-conscious about how my voice sounds. I hope you're enjoying the sultry tones of Matthew. Intersection of corporate media and politics. Yeah, that's where I was going next, Tad, per Faz's wonderful suggestion. One big problem, I talk about this all the time, it feels like I bring this quote up every stream. Marx wrote that the ideas of the ruling class are the ruling ideas. I think he wrote it in the theses on Feuerbach or the German ideology. Maybe both, because the thesis of Feuerbach led into the German ideology. And that's a really big problem for wanting to change the status quo, because how people interpret the world, how they see things, is deeply tied to the way things already are. And so, for example, when a socialist or any kind of leftist proposes an alternative system, they are expected to give every single detail and contingency in response to every single last criticism that could potentially pop up were such a system adopted. But we don't hold the status quo to any such standard. Go ahead and ask the question. I might finish a thought before I answer it, but go ahead and ask it, Sai. I'm excited to have you join the stream today. The status quo doesn't have answers to those questions. They're not held to the same standard. For example, we always say what's going to happen to the coal miners if we replace our energy system and build a new and better one. Let me put this diamond pickaxe away and take a stone one with me to the nether. But we don't ask under the status quo what's going to happen to the coal miners. It's not like even if climate change were fake, coal as an industry is failing, and those jobs are going to die. And so if we held the status quo to the same standard, we would see that it's basically impossible to both support it's impossible to support the continuation of those people's lives, coal miners' lives, and their continued well-being without also supporting a change to the status quo. I had to collect myself for a moment there. Forgive me. Tadpoleon says, there's an intense contradiction between people's increasing desire for work that tells a revolutionary or at least rebellious message and the motives of the media conglomerates that produce them. Now that's a deep question. I feel like it gets brought up every stream now. Maybe I should do a whole stream on it. This is my position currently, Tad. It may change. My position currently is that the attempted commodification of revolution is in the end still a good thing because it is ultimately the bourgeois selling a revolution to the proletarians. And even when the messages, like in Harry Potter and the new Star Wars movies, are bad and don't actually reflect a likely path to revolution or reflect bad ideas on how that revolution should occur, they are at least priming people to think about radical changes to the system and disruption of violent status quos, which is, I think, a good thing on the whole. However, there are problematic aspects of it, and I could be convinced that a framing like the revolution will not be televised could be correct in that the commodification of revolution could actually be some kind of deep death blow, and we just aren't thinking about it in the right way. Tad says, there's always this careful balance of revolutionary optics with obsessively qualifying when revolting is appropriate / how far you're allowed to go. Exactly. And this is one of the classic contradictions of liberalism that gets brought up all the time, and I won't rehash it, but basically liberalism as a system was founded on revolution, and yet it insists on deciding how far other revolutions should go, and in fact asserting that other revolutions should not go any further at all, and that liberalism for some reason is the final system. And this has been the case for every major change in system. Feudalism said that it was the final system, and the republics and empires were wrong. The republics and empires said that the city-state was flawed and that their systems were correct. It's a classic, they call it Whiggish history, formulating a story that justifies the existence of what already exists. Great. Sai asked, I didn't see this, thank you for telling me, Tad, I only saw Sai's second comment, or I guess third. My friend who I'm trying to help radicalize turned to me and asked, how do you break the spell for people who don't buy what we sell because the status quo is powerful? My answer was something, use each moment as a revolutionary moment, and most importantly, to display solidarity, be involved in every fight, and by our example, we draw in new recruits. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different answers to that question, Sai. It's a really good question. Schniff ideology. I'm gonna go Zizek on you, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. No, I find the Marxist answer somewhat convincing, but I think that you need to have some Gramscian undertones for it to really be a complete picture. The Marxist answer to this question, now that I'm done masturbating over my academic prowess, is that you spread class consciousness. You make people aware of what their interests are, and then you help them organize around those interests. He supported worker-led revolutions rather than vanguard-led revolutions or reformism through some kind of elite apparatus. And the reason why I find that generally convincing, broadly convincing, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get any magma cubes, magma blocks, is because people as a whole do behave in ways that they believe benefit what they think is an in-group. That I don't think that has to do with human nature. I think that has to do with our current nature. And so I think defeating nationalism and capitalism requires overtaking people's concept of the in-group and making it include fellow workers rather than people within a nation. So class consciousness is important. People's awareness of the fact that they are part of a working class and that their interests align with other members of that class. That is part one. Part two, this is what Gramsci adds. Gramsci says that people don't actually change according to abstract notions of class relations and exploitation. Things like the material fact, and it is a fact, that workers are exploited in the United States and by capitalist entities is less important than people's understanding of what is fair and how they relate to what is fair. And so, in Gramsci's case, he was analyzing why so many working class Italians capitulated to the fascists. They never enthusiastically endorsed them, but they capitulated to fascism. And his answer was that even though the fascists did not appeal to the class interests of working people or make promises that would support their aims broadly, what the fascists did was they claimed that the old feudal order, which had promises that were agreed upon for generations, things that seemed fair, would be returned to and upheld. And so that is what the Italian farmer thought was fair. They thought it was fair, or the Italian worker thought it was fair for the state to take 20% of their labor value, and for the landowner to take another 20% of their labor value, and for what's left to go back to them. It doesn't matter if that's objectively fair. It matters that they interpret that to be fair. And so something that Gramsci was very keenly aware of, and I think educated us on the left as a whole about, is that we need to be more aware of what people believe to be a fair system, irrespective of whether they are exploited in any objective way. And so in your example of like how you bring people over to the side and you convince them that you're right and the other side is wrong, is you understand their conception of the just. And you try to move their conception of the just towards a class-conscious one. And so that consists of things like at work, in the break room, mentioning abuses that your boss has. And you said solidarity, that's really important. Solidarity isn't just important because it's an effective organizing tool and because we can't win if we don't fight together. It's also important because it helps people understand themselves as part of a larger unit, understand what their interests are in a more holistic way, and tie themselves to a labor movement in search of fairness rather than to an elite reform mechanism. The concept of fairness and justice is the singular motivating force behind all my work, and that is a very good point, says Cy Talos. Cy. I would call you Cy on Twitter. Is that how you pronounce it, by the way? I would hate to mispronounce your username. Yeah, and I think that's true for most leftists. We came into this because what we interpret to be fair is very egalitarian. And what isn't egalitarian we think is unfair. And that's why I became a leftist, was just because I continued following this route of if everybody is created equal, then everybody deserves the same chances in life, the same ability to succeed, so on and so forth. And I came to the inevitable conclusion that capitalism would not provide that equality. And I think that is the case for a lot of leftists. We understand, we come to be leftists because we have a belief that the world should behave and look like a certain way and match certain expectations of justice. And we seek leftism when we realize that capitalism cannot meet those expectations. And I think that helping people realize that and develop class consciousness that puts their fairness in line with other workers is really important. But as I said, books have been written about this. It comes down to a lot of different things. You can't really have a full discussion of how to build class consciousness if you don't have a discussion of racism and sexism as well, intersecting oppressions. There's, as always on this stream and in every leftist discussion, and even in leftist memes, there are 6 million things to discuss, and we can't get through all of them. Sigh, got it. But I think we can win that argument. So this kind of does tie back into why the status quo self-reinforces, because what people believe to be fair as a default is going to relate to what they were raised with. So for example, I was raised in a household which is very, very empathetic. My mother, her favorite book is a book called A Prayer for Owen Meany. It's a good book, I read it. It's not my favorite book, but I enjoyed it. And the whole premise of Owen Meany is that basically a kid accidentally kills his best friend's mom in a baseball game. It hits a baseball and it kills her. Horrible stuff. And the whole book is getting to know both characters and understanding the one who doesn't forgive his friend that accidentally killed his mom, but also understanding the friend that it was an accident. And like the whole thing is just this exercise in empathy. It's like, how much empathy can you have? How many different people's circumstances can you understand? And what would you do in this situation? And that's the kind of household I was raised in. And so my whole life, what's been very important to me is empathizing with the struggles of others and trying to be as fair as possible. And so my understanding of justice, of kindness, of fairness, of what I want the world to look like was deeply tied to how to be as empathetic as possible to as many people as possible. This comes to another tweet that I had recently, that empathy can be weaponized and is weaponized because you are asked to empathize with people always. It is a natural, I can't really say that, but it's a deep human instinct, something that I see that seems to be attached to who we are as people. Early settlements we found show examples of old and crippled individuals being cared for, even at the expense of the rest of the tribe's well-being, because we're empathetic, apparently by nature, I would argue by nature. And so that is part of us, and the way that capitalism weaponizes that is by making us empathize for people who are causing the suffering. So making us empathize for people like that billionaire who cried on MSNBC or NBC News or whatever it was about how much he cares about America, and empathize for Bill Gates when he says, I don't know how much I'm going to have left, right? And so what capitalism does is it takes these concepts that we developed by virtue of being human, by caring about each other, by living lives as working class people, and it attempts to twist them by using its control of media and of ideas to suggest that rather than deposing the oppressors who are putting us in this situation, we should try our best to understand their situation and understand their point of view. And if we do that, then we won't apparently have these ideas that we've had. And this is why I don't think an understanding of fairness alone can achieve what we want to achieve. Like the Gramsci, Gramsci never suggested this, but let's caricature Gramsci for a moment and say that he argued that people just need to have a different understanding of what is fair in order to be radicalized. That caricature of Gramsci would be wrong, because it's not enough to just have an idea of what's fair that misaligns with what you actually see. You also need to have class consciousness so that you understand that what is fair is tied to which side you're on. And the only way to make a more fair world where you can genuinely empathize for people and build a system that is actually empathetic rather than just feigns empathy is to change the socioeconomic system, sociopolitical system as it exists. Let me get somewhere safe before I read that long paragraph, Bread Warrior. I don't want to fall off and lose all of this, all these magma blocks. So just give me a moment. I also need to take another drink. No, don't apologize. I love it when I get long paragraphs because I don't have to think for a second. Last stream was really fun, but I had to do a lot of thinking because the questions were good but somewhat few and far between, and so I had to pace myself, I guess, give myself moments to We've been going at it for 36 minutes so far. If you'd like to leave a customer review below, a scale of 0 out of 10 suggestions, please feel free. You will be entered to win a free coupon for one emoji in the Discord. Let me take a swig of water and I'll read out your question. Bread Warrior 42 says, would it be fair or useful to put like a means versus end framework over it? It seems like a lot of conservative folks are working off of an idyllic version of a good world, and they're sold on the narrative that things like capitalism and misogyny are means to get there, and the idyllic ends justify those means. Core elements of the idyllic conservative world don't seem to be super different from the elements of the ends justifying, e.g. abstract peace or justice. So there's two things there that I should respond to and would be useful to respond to. The first is that in my experience, and your experience may be different, I'm not saying it's wrong, but in my experience, conservatives don't actually have idyllic ends. Like when I talk to conservatives, they just think that this is the best we can do, and that trying to do any better is just going to doom humanity. That's my experience. I had the most optimistic conservative I ever met was a guy that I was in high school with. We actually worked on public policy together, if you can believe it. And he in college told me at one point that, why is this not aligned? That upsets me deeply. That he believed in the future with automation, everybody would own a machine and they would own the products of their machine, and that would be their idyllic life. And so like even the most optimistic conservative worldview is kind of absurd. Like it's not that everybody is freed from labor and everybody can spend all day doing whatever they want. It's like everybody owns, inherits, maintains, and controls a machine to do their work for them. And that's not really... That's not really great, is it? It's not a very ambitious, idyllic view of the future. But as to the core of your question, I have met people who do believe that idyllic ends justify whatever means it takes to get there. In my experience, they're mostly liberals. People who say things like, if we just allow... oh, we have potatoes? I would have been eating potatoes this whole time. I had no idea. If we just allow XYZ to happen to XYZ individual, it makes things better for us. This kind of eco-fascism view that a lot of liberals seem to adopt. Or in the broader term, people who say things like, oh yes, it would be good if everybody could not work, but in order to build a better future, we need everybody to do a lot of work in the short term for low wages, so that someday someone like Jeff Bezos can come along and just decide to liberate us. Like, the liberal worldview does not have room for revolutionary movements or change. And so, I think that a big push that needs to be made on the left, and I say this sometimes, I'll say it again, is to convince liberals that a better future is even possible. Because it doesn't seem that they believe it is. A lot of liberals have just resigned the fact that we are going to suffer for a very long time, and it's going to only get marginally better, except for those people like Steve Pinker who are convinced that UN stats show that the world is actually getting better when this happens. So if that's what you're talking about, we can go into depth on debunking that a little bit. But that's another big part of why the status quo is so completely stubborn. Because the way things are is easy to visualize. It is not difficult to think, okay, things will be like this tomorrow. Even when we know that things cannot physically be like this tomorrow, like we know that we're running out of resources, the physical resources we need to maintain society as it exists, it is still far easier to imagine things continuing than it is to imagine them changing. And that's just because our entire vocabulary of existence is defined by what actually exists. I can't... Maybe if one of you can find me who wrote this, I'll be really happy. There's a quote that an American thinker coined that goes, the most practical system is the one that already exists. And that is in a word, what I'm trying to get at, right? Like, it's easier to imagine the current system continuing to exist than it is to imagine change. And indeed, it's much easier to keep the world as it is than it is to change it. And that is an inherent bias of the status quo. Once any institution is in existence and is in power, it, by virtue of its existence, is normalized and becomes harder to change. Sai says, I'm not a Marxist scholar, but Marx said something about how a capitalist is bound to behaving unethically, or they cease to be capitalist and are doomed. That capitalism restricts even the oppressors, so when people give me empathize with capitalist line, I try to bring that up and reiterate it's still wrong and I have no sympathy because it's the choice they make. We have an animal. An animal spawned and it didn't even need grass. I thought they needed grass. Is all of this effort in vain? I guess we can build out our big, beautiful area now. That's exciting. That's the most exciting thing to have on the stream. Yeah, Marx said rightfully, and even I think it's Adam Smith said this in Wealth of Nations, though I'm not sure on that. Tad says, I have an anecdote related to the pervasiveness and the status quo and the difficulty of conceiving anything different in media. Please share your anecdote, Tad. We would love to hear it. As I was saying, answer is Q first, okay. As I was saying, Marx and Adam Smith both argued that in a capitalist economy, those capitalist corporations which succeed will be the ones who are most ruthless. And what that means in the opposite is that companies that are not ruthless and do not behave ruthlessly and indeed behave morally are much more likely to fail and be replaced by a company that operates unethically. And that's why it's a systemic issue. This is what I do, and I had a conversation with somebody on stream about this yesterday. I think it was the Vice President Faye of the Socialist Rifle Association. She's excellent. You should follow her on Twitter, Faye Eckler. She was arguing that we should try to appeal to individualism to an extent, rather than try to fight it, because individualism is so deeply ingrained in the current capitalist liberal psyche. And while I agree with that to an extent, my argument is that the only way to really get away from this tendency to empathize with billionaires and avoid changing the status quo for fear of being cruel to the currently powerful is to stop understanding them and ourselves as individuals and stop trying to be empathetic in that way, right? If we are systemically empathetic, if we have systemic empathy, what that means is being kind to people through cycles. And so, like right now, there's the school to prison pipeline in Black American communities. If you grow up in a community in the United States that has high levels of incarceration, which happen to be more Black because of redlining and other systemic racism, you are more likely yourself to grow up without role models, without opportunities, to have more police on your streets, be more likely to be caught for the same crimes, and more likely to end up in jail. On top of that, your schools are much more likely to be underfunded and insufficient in how, I guess, the resources they have, the equipment they have, every way that you can imagine. You're much less likely to have even a clean space to exist in. You're much less likely to have good medical care. All of these things come together, and they create a system, a cycle of poverty and imprisonment. And so if you want to create the opposite of that, which I think that all of us want to do, you need to create systems that take people out of poverty and cycle people out of poverty. And so it doesn't matter if you are being empathetic to a billionaire Jeff Bezos, if you are being unempathetic in a way that's going to affect far more people's lives. So I call it systemic empathy, but you can call it whatever you want. The gist of it is that we need to practice empathy in a way that does not just make us feel bad about an individual and worry about accusing somebody of bad intentions. We need to be empathetic in a way that creates a better system and better outcomes for most people. And I think a big part of that is stopping understanding ourselves as individuals and starting to understand ourselves as part of a collective. One of the articles I wrote in Maddie's Let me pull it up first before I finish my tagline. If I just Google the name of the article, it doesn't come up. It's a shame. Here it is. In today's edition of Matthew shares one of his articles and makes you read it instead of listening to the stream that you came here to listen to, I'll share Our Lives Are Not Our Own, which is half a meditation on a movie, but mostly a review of anti-individualism and why individualistic philosophies are harmful and so pervasive in the United States today. I think that in order to escape the system as it exists, we need to stop worrying about what Jeff Bezos' intentions are. We need to stop worrying about him as an individual, and we need to start worrying about the system. Again, another line I keep saying, and this is the last thing I'll say before Tadpollian can bring up his anecdote, is I do not know what Jeff Bezos' intentions are. I cannot see inside of his head. I can suspect that he's cruel by his actions. I might even suspect that he's kind because of his words. I could make up whatever story I want to about Jeff Bezos, based off of what he does in reality. But I do not know what his intentions are. And so we should stop worrying about judging people by their intentions, because that is simply a realm that we cannot access. We will never be able to know what another person's intentions are. And we should stop acting like we can. All right, Tad, take it away. Give me your anecdote. I'll take another drink of water. '60s America. Flintstones and Jetsons. Sorry if I preempted you, Tad. I should be reading this, shouldn't I, for the people on the VOD. Tadpollian is saying nice. Alright, so 1960s America. Two extremely influential shows on television. They're set millions of years apart from each other. One is in the Stone Age, the other is set millions of years in the future. So the Jetsons. I'll let you continue. Though I'd bet a pretty dollar that I could guess where he's going with it. Tadpollian and I, we have similar brain waves. We're long lost and separated souls. Yes, their visions of the future and past are virtually identical. Yeah, it's the belief that the way things were in America in the 1960s is simply the way things are by human nature. And it's this quiet assertion that things cannot be better and will not ever be better. Fred Flintstone lives in a world without modern agriculture, even without medicine, without any of these things we need to survive, and yet he still goes to work every day. And as if going to work at like a stone quarry, I think it's that he works at, is something that makes sense to do in a society where you don't know where your next meal is coming from. And the Jetsons have somebody in a world where all work, feasibly it seems, all work could be done by robots. Even this wealthy socialite goes to work every day. And so it's just they weren't trying to be serious, but media does not have to be trying to be serious to make a good point about the way that the world is. The assertion that things will always be the way that they currently are is one of the most pervasive ideologies and most common schniff ideologies. Tadpollian says meals are compressed into mass-produced pills and people don't even have to walk thanks to automated moving platforms, yet Mr. Jetson goes to work every day and does nothing but press one button. And it's seen as good. There's no... that's the thing. If people showed modern society in a different setting and then critiqued it, like I just finished playing The Outer Worlds. It's an excellent game. You could say that that's a critique, like him pressing the button again and again. But in this show, Jetson presses a button every day at work and is fine, is happy, it's good. That's what his job is. Like, they don't even reckon with the implications of the world that they've created themselves. It's truly incredible, a feat to behold. Mind keeps returning to capitalist realism. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what Sai said for those listening at home. Assuming things will get easier for the working class, but they'll never be freed from the labor they do, right? Like, yes, pushing a button is easier than risking your life in a cannery or something, but it's not. If automation, like it exists in the Jetsons, were used by a centrally controlled economy, nobody would have to work at all. Instead of that, people have to still go to work. The work is just completely meaningless. The cancellation of the future. Yeah, I mean, I said this earlier this stream. One of the biggest fights we have against the status quo is convincing people that a better future can exist. A lot of people, either because of a belief in human nature, quote unquote, that they think does not align with the socialist vision, or because they just have lost hope altogether, don't believe that a better future can exist, that anything better can happen. And we have to convince them that it's possible. I don't know exactly how to do that, but I have some ideas. I also think that media is really important. Tad says, Matt, read the Flintstones comics. Okay, I will. That'll be my homework before, I don't know. I won't say next stream because I'm a lazy asshole and I have my first day at work tomorrow. But at some point, I will read the Flintstones comics and we'll talk about them on stream. Sound like a plan? How about we transition this into a talking about the Outer Worlds stream? Let me change the topic. Class analysis. Marxist analysis, I guess. Yeet. Thank you for completing that, Yeet, Bread Warrior. Alright. Please feel free to leave the stream now if you are going to play the Outer Worlds. Because I will be spoiling things. But it's a really good game. And so if you don't want to be spoiled, genuinely, I would not mind if you left. Though I will be a little bit sad to see you go. It's hilarious because the CEO of the studio insisted that Outer Worlds wasn't political against the direct experience of the devs who worked in loaded lessons learned from working with Bethesda. Yeah, you could tell. It's made by Obsidian. For those who don't know, Obsidian made Fallout New Vegas. I think they also made at least one of the Elder Scrolls games. I would assert this if I weren't on a live stream with people who are smarter than me. And I thought I could get away with it. But they worked with Bethesda. They did contract for the Bethesda, and they weren't allowed to work on further Bethesda games, even though they put a lot of effort into the lore. A lot of people think New Vegas is the best Fallout game. And so you'd expect them to have some opinions about capitalism after that experience, the developers. Yet the CEO claims it's not political. But the Outer Worlds, what it does, it's really interesting in two ways. First of all, it shows you that even in this idyllic world where capitalism can go into space and this is what a lot of capitalists say the solution is to ecological overshoot and the coming disaster of climate change, is we'll go to space, we'll live other places, and we'll asteroid mine for resources. In the world of the Outer Worlds, you already exist in a universe where that's possible. There's something called the jump drive that made it possible to travel far and cheaply. And so they do ship in resources from other planets and ship off people to other planets. And in theory, it should be this like excellent possibility, excellent world full of possibility. And yet, even in this idyllic situation, the ideal way out of climate change and apocalypse, capitalism still cannot manage to succeed. The main conflict of the Outer Worlds, you find out, is that the colonies are running out of food. You spawn in after being stuck in suspended animation for the first 70 years of the colony's existence, or maybe more than that. And you find a world, a system, multiple worlds that are basically all heading towards destruction. Even the capital city, that's supposed to be the nicest place in the entire system, has visible cracks, literal cracks in the wall. Yeah, it was nice to meet you, Sai. Thanks for joining, and I hope that you join the next one as well. Have a good night. The actual capital city has literal cracks in the wall. If that's not a strong metaphor enough, I don't know what would be for you. The whole thing's falling apart, and the reason it's falling apart isn't because they don't have technology. They do. They have the ability to automate all labor, but they're not. It's not falling apart because of a threat by monsters or some kind of I don't know, cheap way out, like a coming nuclear holocaust you have to prevent, a time bomb, a natural disaster. What's killing these colonies, what has killed a few of them, is just the corporate greed, the inability to innovate, the need for every person to be generating profit for somebody else. And you find out that basically the plan of the leadership of they're called a board, the whole system is run by a literal corporate board, is literally to fly to another planet, to another system, and escape, and put everybody else in suspended animation and basically abandon them, probably killing them. That's their answer to the food shortage, the ecological crises they've caused. And so this is really effective media, in my opinion, because it shows that capitalism as it exists does not have a future. There is no future with capitalism, because even given the ideal scenarios, and I know it's just fiction, but it's well imagined and it gets you thinking, even in the best case scenario, this fictional world, it was unable to satiate the need to expand capital infinitely. Even with wide open spaces on a multiple of the planets, it was just impossible for capitalism to sustain itself. The need to commodify everything consumed the lives of these people, destroyed those lives, and prevented any kind of meaningful progress. The second way that it's good is that it shows you a way out. And I don't know, I haven't played all of the different routes. There could be some libshit routes in there too. But the main good guy of the game is a mad scientist who literally suggests that you line up all of the heads of the corporation, the corporate board that governs everyone, and shoot them as a solution. He radically proposes that rather than continue to cut back, as in austerity, put more people into cryogenic containers in this case, make more colonies disappear, evacuate more people from the various planets. Instead of all of those cutting back, what he radically suggests is that you should, in fact, add more people to the system and seek to completely revolutionize the system. Work hard. And he doesn't at any point, even at the end of the game, it plays you back this little clip of what happens to everyone after you finished based on the choices you made. They never say that it was easy. Like, there are still people that suffer, it says. And there's a cow here now. Wonderful. We have animals. I'm so happy. What it says is that what was needed was a completely radical change to the system, redoing things from the ground up. It does not have the rosiest view of revolutionary movements. There are two different quest lines where you have basically a proto-communist, proto-socialist movement that has a character who did something immoral in it, or is even an outright thief. I won't spoil that. And so it's not like it's fully revolutionary, but it does imagine that not only is capitalism futureless, but there is a way to build a future once we move past capitalism. And that there can be good people, like in this game, Phineas Gett, who seek out violence as a solution, even if violence is not appealing in and of itself. There's 3 cattle. Wow, we have so many. We're going to be able to, I'm so happy we're going to be able to build a farm. So it's a good game. There's a lot of different parts of it I could discuss. I kind of want to talk about the iconoclasts sometime. Less like if they're a good revolutionary movement, which I think other people have covered. They're one of the proto-communists, if you don't know. but more like what it says about our media landscape, that the only way you could have a even marginally communist revolutionary movement in a game is if you make them religious rather than revolutionary. The iconoclasts have a lotus flower as their symbol, and they are like red and black, so they're revolutionary in that way, and they're little soldiers, their different faction units are called revolutionaries, and what are they called? Rioters, agitators, like revolutionary names. But the basis of their existence is not in Marxism, it's not in any kind of scientific materialist view, it's in meditation and spiritualism. Way better than Bioshock Infinite, absolutely true. And I think that there could be a lot of ink spilled about why it is that only a spiritually leftist movement, if that makes any sense, could be allowed to exist in a major game title, rather than an outwardly socialist, plainly socialist movement. But that's probably better served for another stream. What The Outer Worlds does very well in the general that applies directly to the stream. Metro does something better, says Tad. Interesting. Tadpolian's summation of Bioshock Infinite is actually the angry black woman slave is just as bad as the slave owner. Yeah, because, again, you're being asked to empathize with the slave owners rather than being asked to empathize with the people suffering. Metro introduces a really cool guy who's part of the communist faction, but arbitrarily have him poison you. Yeah, that sounds about right. In Outer Worlds, you find out that the leader of the communist movement, is it not logged in? I'm going to have to restart Minecraft. Pardon me for a moment. Basically, out of nowhere, they decide that he did a big bad and hurt someone. Or not hurt someone, killed a bunch of people indirectly. And it doesn't seem like something he would do, and it makes a big moral quandary where I don't think one was necessary. And also they choose to have the movement, as I said, be spiritual rather than just materially revolutionary, which is interesting. I don't know. There's 6 million places to be gone with the Outer Worlds. But what it does the best job of, I think I was saying this before I interrupted myself, is portraying the status quo as something that is simultaneously untenable and cannot be escaped from in any moral way. There isn't really, there could be, I did not play every outcome, but there does not seem to be any meaningful compromise action that will actually save lives. You're always put in situations like we will be when the system finally collapses, where you just have to choose between committing violence against an oppressor or allowing the violence against the oppressed to continue. At one point, you're given the option to escape the colony and be one of the people who's who lives while everybody else is cryogenically frozen. And that really poignantly shows what is actually at stake in the current political climate. Basically, you are either the person who, if you are a hero right now, if you have power, you can choose to protect yourself and insulate yourself from the coming crisis, or you can endure the suffering in the name of creating something better. I wish those weren't the choices. I wish we had better choices, but those are it. And that's the ultimate reason, great final line for this stream, that the status quo is so sticky and stubborn, is because ultimately it forces you to take action and be morally responsible if you go against the status quo. Whereas if you simply go along with the status quo and allow it to continue, you don't feel morally responsible for the damage it causes. Any change ladens you with guilt. The continuation of already existing injustice does not. Tad says, aha, but consider that it may be a commentary on the inconsistency and failure of revolutions who don't ground themselves in materialist theory. The revolution does succeed, though. It could be a commentary on that, but I don't know. I just really want there to be a popular game that has a outright revolutionary as one of the main characters and main quest lines. I'm kind of sick of the Skyrim model where if you spend 6 minutes looking at it, you can see that your choices are between a nationalist racist faction and an imperialist racist faction. And even if one of those is marginally more moral than the other, that's not much of a better choice. So at least the Outer Worlds gives you a team that changes the status quo and accurately articulates how harmful the status quo is. I know you're kidding, Tad. Wolfenstein is good. I have never played it, but I have watched video essays on it, and I know that it's good. Can I not get back into Minecraft? What is happening? Maybe their authentication servers are down. Regardless, this has been a good stream. I wish that I could be like in Wolfenstein and team up with some communists to fight some fascists. I apologize for making it a little bit shorter than normal and not posting it around on Reddit. I was down for something casual my last night before my new job. But I had a wonderful time talking with all of you. If you have enjoyed the stream and you're new here, please feel free to follow. You can join my Discord below. We have some wonderful, nice people there. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Medium. You can donate to me on Patreon or directly, should you so choose. I don't know what what to conclude with other than I believe that we can defeat the status quo, and it is incredibly important to understand that the current terror that currently exists is far worse than any terror that a revolution could bring. Chins up, comrades. We have a long way to go. Thank you so much, and have a great night.